Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're breaking down something that a lot of bear hunters overlook completely: why bears prefer certain slopes irregardless of food. Because if you've hunted long enough, you've probably seen this. Two slopes, same elevation, same berry species, same oak brush density, same general exposure. One holds bears consistently while the other one looks perfect and stays empty. If you're not familiar with who I am, I've been hunting and guiding Western big game for over 34 years, and I've been a professional strength conditioning and nutrition coach for more than 30 years, and I'm here to help you become a more successful and consistent bear hunter and outdoorsman. Most hunters assume food is the primary driver, and while food absolutely matters, slope preference is often dictated by factors deeper than calorie location: thermals, security, solar exposure, moisture retention, escape routes, pressure insulation, bedding proximity. All of those, when you understand why bears favor specific slopes independent of visible food, you're going to stop wasting time glassing good looking country that never produces. And you're going to start narrowing your focus to slopes that actually align with how bears survive. Because slope choice isn't random, it's very calculated. First, let's talk about solar exposure. South facing slopes receive more sun, right? North facing slopes retain more moisture and hold thicker cover. East facing slopes, those warm early. West facing slopes hold heat later. Each orientation creates different microclimates, and microclimate affects more than vegetation. It affects comfort, thermals, scent flow, bedding quality, and predator awareness. In spring, south-facing slopes dominate because they green up first. In fall, a lot of hunters assume food overrides slope orientation entirely, but that's not my experience. Even when food exists on multiple aspects, bears often choose one consistently. Why? Because slope comfort matters. If temperatures are warm in early fall, bears might prefer north-facing slopes that remain cooler throughout the day. Even if food is slightly better on a south face, thermal comfort might override minor calorie differences. As fall progresses and temperatures drop, that preference can flip. But the key is this: food is not evaluated in isolation, it's evaluated within environmental context. Now let's talk about thermal predictability. Slopes influence wind and thermal behavior dramatically. A consistent north-facing timber slope often produces stable morning downhill thermals. South-facing open slopes might produce strong afternoon upslope pulls. Certain slopes allow bears to scent check more effectively than others. If a bear beds just below a ridge on a leeward slope, it can monitor wind from coming over the top of that slope and based on the thermal direction, so it can get multiple directions of wind there. Slope orientation also influences scent advantage. Mature bears choose slopes that allow them to detect human approach early, maintain multiple escape routes, and avoid being skylined. If one slope allows a bear to maintain scent leverage while feeding, and another slope exposes that bear to unpredictable wind, the decision becomes obvious, even if the food is similar. Next, we need to look at moisture retention. North-facing slopes often hold thicker brush or denser understory, cooler bedding pockets, longer lasting berries. Even when berry density looks similar between two slopes, moisture retentive slopes might produce higher nutrient density fruit. Bears learn from where consistent yields exist, right? Over time, they develop slope fidelity, not because they're sentimental, but because consistency equals efficiency for them. They want the most they can, the biggest bang for their buck in terms of feeding. So a slope that produces reliable forage year after year becomes part of a bear's seasonal pattern, and slope loyalty is stronger than a lot of hunters realize. That's why you can see bears in the same spots over and over and over again, right? There's a reason for that. Why would they choose that versus a slope over here where you know there's food? Why are they always in that same spot? Let's talk about bedding proximity as well. Many slopes with excellent feed remain unused in daylight because they lack the secure bedding areas adjacent to the feeding zone. Bears Bears prefer slopes where they can bed within a short walking distance or enter feeding zones with minimal exposure and retreat quickly under disturbance. If a berry slope is open with no adjacent security cover, bears are probably going to only use it at night. If another slope offers thick regeneration timber 200 yards above feed, it's going to become a daylight feeding location. Food abundance alone doesn't create daylight movement. Security integration into it does, and security is terrain driven. If you're serious about becoming a consistent Western black bear hunter, I've built something for you. The Bear Hunting ebook series is a complete progressive education system, 7 volumes that take you from mindset to execution. We start with foundations of reality, breaking down the myths and mental mistakes that ruin seasons before they begin. Then we move into bear behavior and movement, so you understand how bears actually live, travel, feed, and use wind. From there, we dive into spring bear hunting and fall bear hunting, green up, food shifts, pressure, and why bears seem to disappear overnight. Volume 5 teaches you how to read terrain, aspect, ridges, benches, and edge habitat like a professional. Volume 6 sharpens your glassing and scouting so you stop missing bears in plain sight. And Volume 7, that's execution, spot and stock strategy, wind control, closing distance, and finishing the encounter. Buy each volume individually or bundle them all to save 60% off at backboneunlimited.com. Another overlooked factor is human visibility. Certain slopes are easier to glass, and that means they're more likely to be hunted. Bears will quickly learn which slopes receive consistent human contact and which ones don't. Open south-facing avalanche chutes are popular glassing targets, so broken north-facing timber slopes are often ignored because they're harder to dissect. Bears notice, they feel the exposure. That's why they gravitate towards those. A slope that visually looks perfect but receives constant glassing pressure is probably going to see limited daylight used from bears. An adjacent slope with slightly worse forage but less human visibility might hold more consistent movement. Slope preference is often influenced by how visible that slope is to hunters, not just how productive it looks. Let's talk about escape architecture while we're talking about terrain, because every slope has escape routes of some kind, but some slopes offer superior emergency exit for them. We're looking for features like finger ridges dropping into thicker timber or draws leading into security basins, cliff bands that block human pursuit, or boulder fields that are inaccessible to hunters. Slopes that provide layered escape options are really the most attractive to mature bears. If a bear can feed on a slope knowing it has a downhill timber escape, a lateral bench route that it can slip into, or an uphill ridge drop, that slope is going to offer them a lot of confidence. If another slope funnels escape into a single exposed path, it's going to become less desirable for the bears. Escape structure matters more than a lot of bear hunters think, and it's purely terrain based. Let's talk about pressure insulation. Certain slopes are naturally insulated from pressure, right? Examples might include slopes behind secondary ridges, or slopes requiring a lot of side hilling access, or slopes shielded from road noise, and slopes that can't be easily glassed from roads. If two slopes have similar forage, but one is 800 yards from the road and fully visible, while the other is tucked behind broken terrain, requiring a lot more effort to access, the second slope is often going to hold more consistent daylight bear movement. Pressure insulation is a slope characteristic, not a food characteristic, right? So don't confuse the two. It's real easy to just look at food, but bears are really efficient, right? And they're only going to expose themselves when necessary. But if two feeding options exist, they're going to often choose the one with lower risk. Let's dissect and discuss slope steepness as well, because moderate slopes often outperform extremely steep or extremely flat slopes. Very steep slopes burn energy and limit feeding opportunities. Very flat slopes increase the bear's visibility and reduce escape contour options, right? How easy they can get behind and through terrain. Moderate grade slopes are where the money is. Easy side hill travel, efficient feeding, quick directional shifts. Those slopes often become consistent bear use areas regardless of exact forage density. When you study maps, moderate contour spacing lines often aligns with repeated bear sightings. You're going to find that those two things correlate with one another. Steep contour stacking, right? Those tight lines might indicate bedding above or below, but not necessarily sustained feeding. feeding. So slope angle shapes movement comfort, right? And comfort shapes the bear's preference. Microclimates also influence insect pressure, right? In early fall, certain slopes are going to contain more moisture and often hold more insects. Other slopes stay breezier and reduce the annoyance. And so bears are going to gravitate based on comfort where there's less bugs bothering them, right? If one slope holds constant wind swirl that disrupts feeding and another holds stable air movement, that difference matters. So those subtle environmental variables accumulate. Slope preference is rarely about a single factor, it's about layered advantages. Now let's talk about some timing shifts that can happen. In early fall, the slope preference might differ from late fall, right? Or spring. In the early seasons, bears might prefer cooler aspects during warmer afternoons. Later in the season, solar warm slopes might be more desirable. But even then, slope preference often remains consistent for mature bears. Why? Because bedding integration rarely changes. A bear that has a reliable bedding zone above a slope will continue using that slope until he's forced out. So slope selection becomes part of a bear's seasonal circuit unless heavy disturbance and pressure interrupts it. Now let's address the myth that bears simply follow the best food, right? We talk about that a lot. Food's super important, so we focus on that in a lot of our discussions in finding bears. But if it were true that bears only follow the best food, irregardless of everything else, then slopes with the highest visible berry concentrations would always hold the most bears, and that's rarely the case. It's often the slope with moderate forage but better wind predictability, or stronger escape architecture, or better bedding adjacent to the food, or lower glassing pressure from humans, right? They can stay secluded better, and those slopes are going to outperform. Food gets them there, but terrain keeps them there, and terrain decides the daylight exposure that we need as hunters. Now let's discuss north-facing slope dominance in pressured country, because north-facing slopes are going to typically offer bears cooler bedding, thicker canopy, moist understory, and reduced hunter visibility. So in heavily hunted units, north-facing slopes often maintain more consistent daylight bear movement than your open south slopes. Not because they have more food, but because they offer more concealment, more security, and scent advantage. So if you've ever wondered why you repeatedly see bears pop out of timber edges rather than open chutes, that's why. They're selecting slopes that integrate cover with their food. And another overlooked factor is the travel approach. If a slope requires crossing an exposed saddle or open spine to access it, bears are probably going to avoid it during daylight. If another slope allows them to approach through broken timber contours, it becomes a lot more attractive. Even if the destination forage is identical, right? That slope accessibility matters to them from the bear's perspective, right? Not yours. Let's also talk about top third positioning. Mature bears often feed in the top third of slopes rather than the bottom, right? I'm not saying that you won't find them in the bottom. We often do, but why do they like the top third? Bears like that top upper third of the slope because they can drop quickly into bedding timber, they can crest ridges for escape, so they're closer to those tops, and they can maintain better wind advantage up there, right? Because they can get that wind coming from multiple directions. So slopes that allow feeding near secure upper benches often outperform slopes where food is more concentrated only at the base, and that upper integration matters. When you're evaluating slopes, always try to look for bench systems near the top or timber pockets near edge of ridges, right? Mixed cover near feeding zones. If that integration exists, the slope is going to be preferred by the bears. And the final piece is consistency. Bears prefer predictability. So slopes that provide stable wind and consistent bedding, reliable escape, and recurring food tend to be reused, even when alternative slopes exist nearby. Preference is built on repeated survival success, not just food. A bear that is fed on a particular slope without negative consequence may return repeatedly, and that loyalty can last seasons, right? Unless pressure forces them to adapt to something else, right? When you step back, slope preference here becomes really clear. It's not about what looks best from a distance, it's about what's best for the bear. Wind advantage, thermal stability, bedding proximity, escape layering, pressure insulation, right? Pressure from humans, that's those secure areas, moderate grade slopes, edge integration where they can easily get back and forth through timber, and the microclimate comfort that we talked about. Food is only one variable. Rain is the framework that determines whether that food is worth using in daylight. So if you ignore terrain structure and only chase visible food, you're going to glass a lot of empty slopes repeatedly. You're going to waste more time. If you evaluate slopes based on integrated terrain logic, you're going to begin to see why one produces better than the other. And once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it because slope selection isn't random for bears, it's just survival math. Now, if you want to go deeper into Western black bear movement, pressure patterns, terrain positioning, and structured decision making, that's exactly why I built the Black Bear Hunting series of ebooks. It's a progressive system designed to help you understand how black bears actually use country and how to position yourself accordingly. I have a link to those ebooks in the description. And if you want ongoing access to the Team Backbone community, classroom, my full digital vault of black bear resources, private discussions, and direct communication to me for planning, you can join Team Backbone at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Everything we talk about here is connected. Preparation is not a single video, it's a system. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.